Listen carefully. Sometimes, not everyone who stretches out a hand for help truly needs it. Some are there just to take away something precious from you after you helped them. Sad as it may sound. If you pay good attention to this story, you will understand that appearances can be deceiving, and not everyone who comes your way comes with good intentions, and also how important it's to always pray before rendering help, because you might know yourself better. But in this world, you don't know the other person's intentions, especially towards you. Once upon a time, in the beautiful, great, busy city of Ibadan, a city of hills and red rooftops stretching as far as the eye can see, a city where the smell of amala and ewedu soup drifts through the air every evening like a warm welcome home. And right in the middle of all this, sitting on the same corner near Molete bus stop, every single day, year after year, a woman that nobody truly understood, her name was Iya Alajọ. Nobody knew her real name, nobody knew where she came from or who her people were. People simply called her Iya Alajọ, which loosely means the woman who collects. She had been on that corner so long that some people truly believed she had always been there, like an old tree at the roadside that nobody remembers planting, but everyone walks past. To look at her, your heart would break immediately. She was very thin, so thin her bones showed under dark, wrinkled skin. Her clothes were torn and patched with cloth that did not match. She wore a faded headscarf that had once been white. Her feet were bare, cracked and covered in the red dust of Ibadan roads. She sat on a worn mat, her legs stretched out in front of her, her hands always held up to anyone who passed. Her eyes were the one thing that was different. Deep, dark eyes. Some people said they looked sad and tired. But others, when they thought about it carefully later, said those eyes were always watching, calculating. Not the eyes of a woman who was suffering, the eyes of someone who was working. But in those days, nobody noticed, because when you see someone that poor sitting on the ground, you do not study their eyes. You feel pity. You reach into your pocket. You give what you can. And that moment of human kindness was exactly what she had been counting on. The first victim people clearly remembered was Baba Remi, a provisions trader at Bodija Market. A good man, a hard-working man who had spent 10 years building his shop from nothing. 2 working freezers, shelves full of goods, a generator he had bought on credit, and finally finished paying off. Baba Remi was not rich, but he had built something solid with his own hands. One morning, passing Molete bus stop on his way to open his shop, he saw Iya Alajọ. The cracked feet, the thin arms, the torn clothes, something in his chest moved. He reached into his pocket and placed 200 naira in her outstretched hand. She looked up at him. Those dark eyes held his for a moment longer than felt comfortable. No thank you, no smile, just a long, cold look, and then she turned away as if he ceased to exist. Baba Remi walked on, feeling the small, warm feeling that comes when you help someone. He did not think about the look she gave him. 3 months later, his shop was empty. It happened piece by piece, the way a wall crumbles before it finally falls. First, one freezer broke and the repair cost more than he had. Then, a trusted supplier cheated him and disappeared with his money. Then, his goods began spoiling. Then, his customers, one by one, stopped coming. A man who had worked 10 years to build something solid was sitting in an empty shop, completely lost and completely confused. Then came the story of Mama Tunde. Mama Tunde was 7 months pregnant, returning home from her antenatal checkup. The doctors had said everything was perfect. The baby was healthy, the heart beat strong, the weight good. She was almost floating with happiness as she walked through Molete. She saw Iya Alajọ, felt a rush of compassion, and placed 500 naira, nearly all she had that day, gently in the old woman's hand. Those dark eyes looked up. The same cold, calculating look. No warmth, no gratitude, just watching. 2 weeks later, Mama Tunde lost her baby. When Mama Tunde's sister began asking questions around the neighborhood, she found not one, not two, but 3 other women who had lost pregnancies after giving money to the old beggar at that corner. The whispers began quietly, nervously, afraid of being called superstitious, but they began and they spread. Over the years that followed, more stories came, and a very clear, very frightening pattern took shape. There was Kunle, a young man who had just received a job offer from a big company in Lagos, the job he had prayed and waited years for. On his way to make preparations, he passed Iya Alajọ at Molete bus stop and gave her 100 naira without thinking twice. 3 days later, the company called. Budget review, position cancelled, gone, just like that, the future he had counted on. Then came Mrs. Adeyemi, a fabric seller at OJ Market, with loyal customers and a steady business. She gave Iya Alajọ money on a Thursday afternoon. By the following Monday, her biggest customer, a woman who bought fabric in large quantities to resell, called to say she was changing suppliers. Mrs. Adeyemi lost nearly half her monthly income in a matter of days. There was a student named Biodu who was waiting on his WAEC results that would determine whether he could enter university. He had studied hard. His teachers believed in him. On his way to check his scores, he gave the old woman some money. His results were a complete disaster. He failed subjects he was absolutely certain he answered correctly. Business collapsing, pregnancies ending in grief, job offers disappearing, examination results destroyed, and always, just before the disaster, the same act of kindness given to the same thin old woman at Molete bus stop. But here is the painful part. Even with all the whispers, people still kept giving her money because she always looked so genuinely pitiful. Because the disaster did not always follow immediately, sometimes it came 2 weeks later, sometimes a month, so people told themselves it was coincidence. They told themselves, I am a person of faith. I do not believe in such things. And so they gave, and so they suffered. And she sat on her mat every single day, collecting not just their money, but their blessings, their open doors, and the futures they had worked so hard to build.
What nobody in Molete ever saw was what happened when Iya Alajọ went home at night. Every evening around 6, as the Ibadan sky turned from blue to orange, she would quietly fold her mat, tuck it under her arm, and disappear into the narrow streets behind Molete. She moved through those streets quickly, speaking to no one. People in that area did not greet her, not because they did not know her, but because something about her made people look away. She lived alone in a small walled compound tucked behind a row of houses. A few people had caught accidental glimpses of her there. A neighbor who once looked through a gap in the fence, a child who wandered too close one evening. They all told the same story, in lowered voices, as if speaking about it too loudly might bring it to their own door. At night, she did not look like a suffering old woman. Her back was straight, her steps were firm and confident. She would sit in the center of the courtyard and lay out all the money she had collected that day, every coin, every note, carefully in front of her. Then she would begin. Movements nobody could properly name, words spoken into the night air in a voice too low to hear, a smell rising like something burning with no visible fire. She would hold each piece of money, turn it over, speak over it, and the air around her would thicken and shift, even on the stillest nights when no breeze was blowing. This was the true transaction, not money for money, but blessing for blessing. She was not keeping the naira for herself. She was using it as a vessel, because every coin a good-hearted person pressed into her palm carried with it that person's goodwill, their grace, their faith. And she knew how to pull that invisible thing out of the coin and redirect it, away from the giver, into darkness. In the morning, she would put her torn clothes back on, wrap her old headscarf around her head, pick up her mat, and walk back to her corner looking every inch of the helpless old woman that Ibadan had always known. Few years, hundreds of ruined lives, and never once caught. until one ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything. His name was Adekunle Fashola, but everyone called him Deji. Deji was 32 years old. He worked as a technician at a small electronics repair shop near Dube Market, fixing phones and appliances for people who could not afford to buy new ones. He was not rich, not powerful, not well-connected, just an ordinary young man doing his honest best in Ibadan. But Deji had one thing that set him apart. Not talent, not luck, a habit. A simple, daily, unbroken habit. Every morning before leaving his house, he prayed. Not long or dramatic prayers. Not prayers that needed an audience. Just quiet personal words. Lord, go with me today. Cover everything I touch. Let nothing evil attach itself to me or to what I do. Order my steps. And this habit did not stop at morning. Before he made any decision, big or small, he would pause briefly and bring God into that moment. It was simply who he was. That Tuesday, walking his usual route through Molete to work, he saw Iya Alajọ on her mat. He had heard fragments of the whispers surrounding her name, but like many people, he was not entirely sure what to believe. What moved him that morning was simply what he saw with his eyes. Feet cracked and bleeding at the heel, the hollow look of someone who had not eaten since the day before. He reached into his pocket and brought out 100 naira. Then he paused, not from fear, simply because it was his habit. Before anything that mattered, he covered it in prayer. Quietly in his heart, he said, Lord, I am giving this from a good heart. Let this kindness be blessed and not cursed. Let no evil attach itself to what I do right now. I give in your name. Cover me with your grace. Just those few words. No one around him heard a thing. He placed the money in her hand and walked on. She looked up. Those dark, calculating eyes found his face, and she tried to do what she had done to hundreds of people before him. Reached out in the spirit to take the blessing, the grace, the goodwill he had carried in that act of giving. She hit a wall. Something solid and immovable surrounded this man, a covering her darkness could not cross. She pushed, and the force came straight back at her, like a wave crashing against rock. She could not take a single thing from him. Deji noticed nothing unusual. He walked on toward Dugbe, thinking about his workday. But Iya Alajọ sat very still for a long time after he disappeared into the crowd. Something that had never happened before had just happened, and deep inside, something in her had cracked. Weeks passed. Deji lived his ordinary life. His work was steady, his health was good, small good things happened quietly. A job that paid a little more than expected, his rent money ready earlier than usual, a general sense of things going right. He did not connect any of this to the old woman. He had simply prayed and given, as always. But Sis Bisi was watching. Sis Bisi sold pepper and tomatoes from a store near Molete and was the kind of woman who noticed small details that others walked past. She had seen Deji that Tuesday morning, seen him pause, seen him bow his head slightly before placing money in the old woman's hand. She knew the stories. She knew about Baba Remi and Mama Tunde and many others. So she waited. 6 weeks later, she found a moment to speak with Deji as he passed her store. She asked casually how things were going. He smiled and said, "Fine, thanks be to God. Things are moving well." Sis Bisi went back to her stall and sat quietly with her own thoughts for a long time. Then she began to talk. First to the woman at the next door, then to her neighbor. Her neighbor told her pastor, a man who did not dismiss things easily, who had seen enough life to know the world contains things that simple words cannot explain. He came to Molete one Saturday morning and stood at a distance, watching Iya Alajọ carefully. He watched from afar the way her eyes moved when someone gave, the way her lips tightened ever so slightly around each coin before she let it fall. He gathered a small group of trusted people right there on the street, and they prayed together softly, heads bowed, barely noticeable in the crowd. And something in the atmosphere over Molete began to shift. It happened on a Friday morning, a busy, noisy, ordinary Friday. A man named Mr. Olarinwoju, a civil servant who passed through Molete each Friday, had decided that today he would finally give the old beggar some money. Something had always made him hold back before, but today he felt generous.
He reached into his pocket and began counting out some notes. Then a small boy appeared, no more than 5 years old, a child who had slipped from his mother for just a moment in the crowd.